So the next thing I want to do is kind of go through the user interface, the design of the user interface a little bit. What I'm doing here is essentially just sort of inventing a screen or a monitor that is going to work as my almost like a holographic screen. I found some uh, images on Google that I'm using, and I'm just sort of copying pieces of it into this new Photoshop file, and I'm just going to use this as the basis for. Actually, I think what I might do is this process might go a little faster, and will probably be a little bit more precise if I just drafted some lines and maybe used vector line work to do some of these things. And I'm just gonna basically turn this into a bit of a CAD drawing. And so I'm just gonna set my units to centimeters. I actually don't think that really matters, but just in my top view, what I might do is create a rectangle or a surface. Um, Actually, I just need to draw a rectangle. And we'll make this, the length would be 1920, and the width would be 1080. And this is just the standard screen resolution of a monitor. Um, Again, it's not 1920 centimeters versus 1080 centimeters. I just need the aspect ratio to be correct. And remember, this is a vector drawing, so there's really no scale here. It can be as big or as small as we want it to be. Um, Actually, let's make a surface out of this. And I'm going to set this to rendered. And I'm going to take my Photoshop, like rough layout. I'm just going to save this as a JPEG. And just use this as a backdrop um, for my Rhino drawing. Um, sure. wa.k. And this is really not anything that's going to be ever used as an actual texture. I'm just going to basically use it to create my texture. So let's find that. And just drag this onto that Rhino surface. And maybe I'll use a different color. Um, I could have done a background bitmap as well. Um, would that make more sense? Well, doesn't matter. Let's use rectangle tool. Okay, so we're back in our scene, and I have my UI sort of set up now as a black and white image. I exported it as a JPEG and I brought it into Photoshop and I inverted it to use as a mask. And so basically, I want these white lines to kind of glow that sort of holographic blue. Not dissimilar to something like this. You know, you have this um, cyan teal kind of color, and then you start to see like this glowing haze. We don't need to actually add this glowing haze to the texture itself. You could, but we could also just use the post-processing volume in Unreal Engine to do that. And so I'm ultimately probably going to just end up with one screen, but since we have these four screens here, I'm just going to test my um, UI and see if see if I like the way it looks, see if I like what it's doing. So I'm going to drag that in, and this is just a JPEG file. And so here's our UI model. And so we can see that this material is, or this panel has this material. So I'm just going to go in here and start adjusting this material, right? So let's grab some elements from our scene here. So I might grab this as a mask. What does this look like? It's just kind of like a dot pattern. I think I made this from these LED screen textures. I want to grab my texture that I just created, and I'm probably going to use this parameter, vector parameter node to create my emissive material. And so I think that's pretty much all I need to start. And so let's go ahead and start adjusting some of these things. So I'm going to select my main material node, and I'm going to turn this into a unlit material. So we're just dealing with emissive color, and I want this to be masked, which means it's going to have only it's going to have like information that I'm going to use black and white information to cut away parts of that material, right? And so I want this to glow blue, so I need to ramp up this blue value. So anything above 1 starts to emit light. So I'm going to set this to 100, and I'll set all of the, I could set all of the other ones to 0. And so now I have this glowing blue. Let's see what it looks like if I set it to 1,000. It's basically the same thing. The reason we don't see the effects of the post-processing is I think it's just because the preview doesn't have it. But let's see what it starts to look like in real life. So I'm going to set maybe blue and green to try to start to get that teal effect. Maybe let's make this a little bit more blue and a little bit less green. Right, so it's going to start to look something like this. So I think that's a good point to start. And then we have two masks. One is the screen pattern itself, and one is my UI. And so what I could just do is, like similar to Photoshop, we can multiply these two, and all that's going to do is layer one on top of the other, and then we could set this to the opacity. And you can start to see what that looks like, right? I think this is starting to look more or less like what I want. I'm just going to dock this in here, and let's take a look at the material itself. And you could see it's starting to give us the bloom, right? I think the density of my screen is going to be a problem. So let's go back into this material. So this texture is just a little bit too weak, or it's a little too sparse. So I'm just going to use my black and white image, and this might be good enough. We can start to see the map. we can start to see uh, it's kind of automatically giving me a little bit of that sort of screen door effect that you see on the pixels of monitors, let's say. It's a little blown out, so I'm going to ramp down these values. So 1,000 is maybe way too much. So let's just try 100. And let's just set this to 20 and see if, yeah, this is a little bit more reasonable in terms of the emission itself, right? And then I'm going to start to insert other things in here, like scrolling text, for example. I might actually, I'm going to slow down this camera a little bit because it's like blowing past. I might start to make the map itself a separate surface because I actually want the map to rotate based on what the player is going to do. And so basically, the player is intended to push the help button to, get a sense of their location and orientation. And so I want this UI to ultimately display information kind of similar to what I had sketched out, but just as like a mapping exercise, so that the player starts to understand where they are in the context of the structure. So I might even include some graphics that describe the Yale Citadel. I don't know if I'll use the word citadel, but again, these are all just sort of design decisions. But ultimately, I want this information to show up there, like the Department of Privacy Scientists, Neuroeconomics. And I think I have a few others that I wrote down somewhere, and hopefully I'll be able to find what those are. And so this is really going to, right? And such, if you think about it, this is such a small part of the experience, right? It's actually really important to establish the narrative. And so I'll probably spend a good amount of time making this a little bit more interactive, so that the player can really get a sense of where they're at before they start to move around and navigate the scene itself. Okay?